It's G-Day for the Bulldogs. Who will you have your eyeballs on? I know where mine will be.
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Into the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Georgia Bulldogs football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste, and alongside me are Jarvis Davis and Brian Gebhardt. The Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, guys, will Kirby's message come through? And will the Dogs off the football field shine like the ones on it? We'll talk about that later. But first, you know, we got to talk about G-Day. That's exciting because it kind of makes you feel like football, like real football is within reach, if you will. And it's going to be a busy, crazy weekend around our entire Atlanta metro. If I'm not mistaken, Georgia Tech has a spring day Saturday, as well as Georgia State has spring day Saturday. So all eyes are going to be on what those spring games look like. But we know what it is, particularly that number one team down in Athens is where all eyes are going to be. So I got a couple questions for you guys in terms of where your eyes will be on Saturday. Jarvis, let's start on offense. What are you looking for from this Dogs offense overall, and maybe from one specific player?
To be honest with you, I'm looking for that guy who's going to step up behind Domonic Lovett, because I really feel like he's going to be that number one guy. We've been hearing a lot of good things about the connection between Carson Beck and Domonic Lovett.
Indeed.
And of course, there was a lot of hoopla made about the transfer, the wide receivers coming in, guys like Colbie Young. We heard early on in the spring he was making a little noise, and then London Humphreys as well. So I'm interested to see who solidifies himself as wide receiver 2. With a little smidget of Dillon Bell, maybe potentially coming into
play. I love it. I absolutely love it. What about you, Brian? When you think about the offense and kind of having an opportunity to see them get things going, get things underway this weekend, kind of what are you looking for in them, and or one specific player on offense?
Yeah, mine's kind of that wide receiver, tight end-ish. Like Jarvis just mentioned, Domonic Lovett is, he's been dominant according to Kirby, so he looks like he's going to be the one. And you mentioned a couple names there, Colbie Young, who's gotten a lot of hype. He reportedly scored in the closed scrimmage practice that they had this past Saturday as well. You mentioned Dillon Bell. And then apparently, I don't believe it yet, I got to see this, but Arian Smith has apparently been balling out in practice and in scrimmages and in all sorts of things. And he's kind of been a one-trick pony, and honestly, not even great at that one trick all the time. So I'm curious to see if he can have that, consistency, if he kind of shines in that way. So that's the thing. All right, who is going to be the second or third option? Because I think there's 2, 3, 4, 5 names, and I'm wondering who really pops. And the other one I'm really looking at, I just want to see what Ben Urasek looks like on the football field with these other players. That veteran tight end coming over. He's got the experience. I'm very curious to see what he looks like.
Indeed. And that was going to be mine. And maybe if for no other reason, you feel like there's such an opening, and I don't want to say kind of like the sky's open, but kind of like the sky's open, or you could say a hole opened up with Brock Byers' departure. So always interested when you have that generational type player, who steps up and how does it look to completely fill that gap? Obviously, one person can't fill it, but I am curious to see how Ben Urasek kind of leads the charge in filling that gap. Now, let's go defense. That's another area where, hey, we've seen a lot of departures, obviously, because guys are doing what they do. Dogs go to the draft. So, Jarvis, what are you looking for from the defense overall, and maybe from one specific player?
I'm going to have to go with Jonah-Ajonye. I think he's a guy that's like you said, making a little noise. I know team, you probably saying, oh yeah, no, Jarvis gonna go Mykell Williams. Nope, I'm not going.
I know, you took my thunder.
You knew which area you were going in though, Jarvis. Yes. That wasn't a secret. Yeah.
I'm going with Ajonye. So I think he's a guy that's been making a lot of noise, because one of the things that I always appreciated about Georgia is their development, from a skill set standpoint. And we know what the talent, I don't have to list all the names that have come off that defensive line in the past few years, and specifically guys who've been first round type guys. And I think Ajonye has had some offensive linemen talking about it, because that's what you look for. If an offensive lineman is talking about a guy and saying, hey, this guy's been really doing this thing, that means he's been making some noise all up and down the offensive line, because offensive linemen talk. They're very smart guys. They was like, hey, man, this guy, I'm telling you, they probably getting scout reports on one-on-ones when Ajonye is coming up to bat. So I think that when you think about it from that standpoint, and just all the little things I've been hearing and kind of keeping my eye on, I feel like he's a guy that, I want to definitely keep an eye on and see, hey, I want to see if the Kool-Aid can be drank by me as well.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Now let's talk position groups. Again, I kind of have a sense of where you guys might go, but just for kicks and giggles, BG, what position group will you have your eye on? And that can be on either side of the ball.
I think I'm actually going to surprise you here. I think I'm going to go off the board a little bit. Mine's the secondary, and it's just—
You surprised me. Yep.
Yeah, we usually talk about the big uglies here with this group. So, but for me, it's just— and part of it's because it's G-Day, right? And
True.
Like, we're going to get some work in the trenches, but I always am wary of like how hard those guys are going on a consistent basis. Not saying that they're going to completely kind of half, but in that way of it might be a little less, little broad. I want to see what some of the young DBs can do against some of the older wide receivers in this group. Like, I want to see what Ellis Robinson looks like against an Arian Smith and that kind of thing, or how they work Aguero in and Julian Humphrey and Daniel Harris, like what that actually looks like, because I think that's going to be such a big strength of this team that I'm curious to see how that's laid out and what they look like against that other competition on this roster.
Yeah.
I think they add another name too, of BG. You talking about Ja'Cory Thomas as well, and also Joey Aguero. He's the guy that start. We know how important that star position, and he's the guy that kind of leading the charge on that. And the interesting thing that I feel like that's as far as the back end goes, I know you kind of talked about the corners. As far as the back end of this defense, Malachi Starks isn't there. And we know Georgia likes to cross-train during the spring, because that's just how it goes, right? Because you never know who's going to get hurt and who's going to have to be able to step in a big moment, throughout the season, because we know how it is more than likely you're going to get hurt at some point, and you got to have guys ready to roll to step into that play. But I think that Joel Aguero is a guy. He's been making a lot of noise. And remember how I talked about how offensive linemen talk about guys that have been doing well. Domonic Lovett had pointed out Joel as well. He was like, oh, man, this is a guy that knows what he's doing. He kind of reminds me of Tyke Smith, which is a really good thing.
Yeah, that's and
even Kirby talking about how, not Kirby, but, players talking about how, hey, his ceiling is a little bit higher than Tyke. And we know Tyke was the playmaker, the go-to guy on this defense last year, and now he's going on to the NFL. So when you start getting people to kind of rumbling and having those type of conversations about you coming into his second year, those are some things that you look for, and he's definitely a guy you got to keep an eye on Saturday.
Now, Jarvis, in addition to that DB group, is there another position group on either side of the ball that maybe you'll have your eye on?
Come on, T. No.
You're not going to surprise me. Okay, fine. Well, you know what? You got your surprise in already, because you did not lead with Mykell Williams. That was your surprise for the day.
Right. So I've already given you my one surprise. I can't surprise you again. But yeah, it has to be the defensive line, right? Because I know we're going to get into it as far as how Kirby's kind of been sending the message throughout this entire offseason. Just like, hey, man, we got a really good offensive line. Defensive line got to get better. I know it pains him to say that. So, yeah, I'm definitely going to have my eyes on defensive line for sure.
Indeed. And like you said, we'll talk about it a little bit more. But I have one more question for you. We'll talk about that between the hedges, kind of what Kirby's messaging was and how you think that might be received. But one-on-one matchups always tell the tale as well, or could tell a little bit of the tale on who has that kind of edge going into continuing your off-season practices and workouts and kind of heading into the summer and the season. That said, BG, is there a one-on-one matchup that you were like, can't wait to kind of see how that one plays out?
Ellis Robinson versus any of these wide receivers. I'm really excited. I'm really excited about him. I think there was just so much chatter about a lot of the other players, and he was such a big recruit. And I think he can come in and be an impact starter potentially right away, or at least get a lot of playing time. So if Domonic Lovett has been that dominant guy, I want to see what Ellis Robinson can do against him. I want to see what he can do against a speed guy like Arian Smith. or if it's against someone like Dillon Bell, who might be a little bit more physical there too. So I'm curious to see what he looks like and what some of the other young corners look like as well.
Yeah, for me, it has to be the guy who got a little playing time last year, Monroe Freeling, 6'7", 310-pound sophomore. I want to see what he looks like against a guy like a Mykell Williams or a Jonah-Ajonye, excuse me. And for those guys, this is where you kind of get into a really nice test from a passing standpoint. We know they can't touch the quarterback. I get it. But when you're talking about getting into your pass set, I want to see what the youngster has against some of those veteran guys like a Mykell Williams.
Indeed, indeed. So we'll talk a little bit more about Kirby Smart and his words of wisdom, or maybe his words of challenge, when we come back and go between the hedges. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. So think about this. The sports calendar is absolutely loaded. I mean, we're talking about 3 spring games just here locally, for crying out loud. And FanDuel is making it even more exciting to get in on the action. Got to think about this. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on Major League Baseball, the NBA, NHL, and so much more. You know, it's down to the wire with the NBA, so that postseason is coming up soon, and everything is going with MLB. We're off to a start. I think they've now played about 9 or 10 games. And of course, with the NHL, they're down to the wire and getting ready for the postseason too. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a big win. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, because FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. So, Kirby is never at a loss for words. I want to take you guys back to a conversation that we kind of started last week, where Kirby said, quote, "We have players on our defensive line who can get better. The worst feeling as a coach is when you don't have players that you can get better." There are coaches all across the country right now on defensive lines who don't have one 300-pounder. We got several, as you just mentioned. We just have to continue to get them better and get them to execute at a higher level. So, Brian, what do you think Kirby's message will do? How will that resonate with this D-line in any way that maybe you'll be able to see the result or the fruits of in the spring game?
Yeah, it's interesting that Kirby's already calling out a position group like this so early on. I mean, he's always constantly challenging people, but I think it's weird for him because during this whole run with Alabama and then into his time at Georgia, like, just look at the guys that he's had, and it doesn't, and I think this roster has that ability, but you look at, like, Jonathan Allen's and Mount Cody's and, Jordan Davis's and Jalen Carter's, and it's like, who is going to be that guy on the team? And he knows how important this is, because with the way the secondary is shaping up, this team, if they get a good defensive line and they have it one more notch above what it was last year, because it was a step down, they weren't that elite top of the line, going to stop the run all the time type of defense. And that's Kirby's bread and butter. Like that, if he can do one thing that he wants to do, it's going to be stop the run and be the best at it. So he wants to get back to that. And I think he's just going to, keep pounding and keep preaching. And this is something Jarvis has talked a lot about. This offensive line is really good. So we're going to see it a little bit this Saturday in G-Day. And you hope it's one of those iron sharpen iron things continually through this offseason where they can get to that level.
And this is the time to challenge your players, right? Because if you're coming into the fall with questions about who's going to step up on your defensive line, you're in trouble. Because we understand what it's like. Because with the transfer period, starting on April the 16th, like, this is the time where, like, if Kirby doesn't see what he wanted to see in the spring, guess what? He making some phone calls. Like, he can't get anybody from the SEC. Well, he dang sure can doggone go up to the Big 10 and the Big 12, and and see, you want to come down to Georgia and be a rotational guy, potentially go to the league, because that's what we do. We develop players. So it's an easy sell to get guys to come down here if they don't do what they're supposed to do. So I'm not surprised too much at all when it comes to the messaging, so to speak, because we understand, like, this dude is a defensive coordinator at heart, through and through. And one thing I know about defensive coordinators, they absolutely hate to be one of the worst teams, not the worst teams, but like to not be where they should be from an expectation standpoint as far as stopping the run. And we know how important that is to Kirby. Once you make a team one-dimensional, you could do what you want to do, and that is put your hand in the dirt and rush the passer and put the quarterback on the ground and start forcing turnovers. And I know that what Kirby wants to do. So I think that this is why you probably kind of see him a little bit out of character, BG, like you mentioned, when it comes to, hey, we got a really good offensive line. Oh man, that defensive line can get better. so he's giving praise to the elite group, right? But he always mentions the guys that, hey, I need y'all to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And speaking of that, kind of going in a little bit of a different direction, like you said, there are some groups that we haven't heard him talk about a whole heck of a lot, or individual players that we haven't heard him talk a whole heck of a lot about. And so, BG, my thought there was this: is there any player or is there any position group where you're like, you know what, I don't need to see that player, or I don't need to see them for any more than just a couple of snaps because, hey, we're good?
It was actually, this should be an easy question, but it was kind of tougher than I thought, as you were, you had thrown it out there on our rundown and our pre-production and everything. And I guess the layup answer for me is, I guess, would be Carson Beck, just in the sense of like, all right, just keep him in bubble wrap, make sure he's good, quarterback some reps, because it's everything else that I do. I mean, I'm very curious to see how the wide receivers are, but then it's sort of like, all right, well, Beck needs to sort of stay in to see how that looks and all that type of thing. But I'm very curious to see how the wideouts and tight ends and the running back room look. But I'm okay if I only get a few minutes of Beck, or like 1 or 2 series. And it's like, okay, cool. We got plenty of time to get ready for that Clemson game. We'll be just fine. So Carson would be my answer in that spot.
Oh, I think that's a great answer. And to kind of add to what you're saying, BG, when you look at what Kirby wants, he wanted 4 quarterbacks. He's been very adamant about wanting to have 4 guys on that roster, right? And then with Dillon Raiola catching fire and heading to Nebraska, and when you have the quarterback transfer from UNLV who kind of changed his mind the last minute, can't remember his name. His name escapes me right now. But you look at what Gunnar Stockton has been able to do, and him with Brock Vandagriff transferring to Kentucky, he look like he's gonna be the starter there at Kentucky.
Is that Jaden?
Yes, there we go. Yep, thank you. Nice. Exactly what you said. Because whichever one it was, So I think it's a matter of what Gunnar Stockton does once he gets in and kind of playing within structure, because we understand, like, he got a little athletic ability. He was able to show that in the Orange Bowl against Florida State, right? He coming out of the second half, he was still working with the starter. So, you can kind of put that into his game tape. Like, okay, we can see what you could do from being able to create plays, but in the spring game, you're not going to be able to do that. You got to sit back there and throw that bad boy from the pocket. Hey, so let's go through your progressions. Let's see if you can check down on this particular play, because we understand what Carson is. He's on next level right now. So as far as from a NFL quarterback getting in the team into the right play, you heard Kirby talking about him. He's the guy that can get you into that right play. That's next level stuff. That's NFL quarterback prospect type conversations. So now Stockton, like, we need you to be able to play within this system and be able to add that mobility once live ball is playing, once you get into the game. And hopefully that's not anytime soon, because you want Carson Beck to remain healthy.
Yeah, I think Saturday is just as important to Gunnar Stockton as it is anybody else that's going to be suiting up and going, because I feel like all eyes are going to be on him, because this is Beck's team. He's a Heisman favorite. It's a potential number 1 overall pick, all those type of things. But there's still a lot of question marks about Gunnar Stockton and how he fits and how different he's going to be potentially, because we're, with adding these extra games and these extra playoff games, this season is going to be longer than ever coming up here in the fall. And we all know football is a physical sport. There's a good chance that Gunnar Stockton has to play just out of, necessity at some point during the season. So it's really important, his development, to really solidify himself as that number 2 and just put everybody at ease in the sense of like, okay, if Beck goes down, this team's still good enough to be able to win. So Saturday is important for him.
Yeah, and I think you could kind of say the same, maybe not on the same level, but I think you could kind of say the same for the running back room as well. Like, we know it's a good, solid core group, but I think you hit the nail on the head. This is the first time that we're going to see a season play itself out to this extent. And we know how important it's going to be to have that complementary run game. But the question becomes, especially because we've seen things like what happened to Kendall Milton up and down with the injuries in prior seasons, you want to see, hey, where's the stability? Kind of who's going to be that guy not just RB1, but RB2, RB3, who's going to be the guy that brings the most stability to that room in terms of your best ability is your availability. So again, while I wouldn't say it's an all eyes on the running back room, kind of like Gunnar Stockton or really the QB room overall, I would say that there probably will be some eyes on it on some levels, simply because you just got to know what you're working with and kind of the style of run, and getting your O-line kind of familiar with the different styles of run that each of those running backs brings to the table. So now, got a question for you guys. I've asked all my questions of BG, asked my questions of JD. Now I got a question for our audience. Have you checked out Locked On Sports today? It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, guys, time to have a little bit of fun in Next Up, because next up we have some dogs, but not the dogs on the football field. We got some dogs that are going to be looking to represent in different areas. BG, I'll start with you because we know that you absolutely love golf. In fact, when I saw this, I was like, I think I might know somebody who wants to have a little bit combo about this. So once again, the dogs will be well represented in Augusta at the Invitational. 6 former players are actually in the field for this 88th Master Tournament that has, God, it came so quickly. Starts, of course, officially Thursday. That ties the record for most UGA participants, but it actually matches a record that was just set in 2022, which probably speaks volumes about what that program is able to do. But BG, how many of these 6 dogs have an actual legit chance to make the cut at Augusta?
They all actually have a legitimate chance to make a cut. I would say probably except Chris Kirk. I would be surprised if he wound up making the cut. And just by the numbers, I think we get 3 to 4 of those 6 wind up making the cut. But a lot of these guys are, because none of these guys are like A+ pro golfers, especially at this point in their careers. So, but Brian Harmon, Harris English, those 2 individuals, they should do really well. Bubba Watson has good experience here and has won 2 green jackets, but he's doing live golf and playing pretend right now. So not a whole lot's going to be going on with that. But Brian Harmon should do really well. He's been in form for the last couple of years. He's lefty, and they do really well at Augusta. His short game is very good. So I think 3 to 4 of the 6 will wind up making the cut. And I think 2 of the guys will wind up being top 25 this week.
Oh, nice. So that should be a nice contingent down there in Augusta rooting them on too.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And then the one thing that's just a big concern for me, not a big concern, but why do we got to have Masters Week the same as the G-Day game? We got Georgia Tech. What are we doing? What are we doing? I really think that actually, I think it interferes with how many people are going to show up at Georgia Tech G-Day this week, because they're going to be posted in front of their TV. You're going to have 2 or 3 screens going on. I mean, I know that's what I'm going to be doing. So it's just, these 2 things should never happen at the same time. We've got all of April to work with here outside of the NFL draft. Let's figure this out, people. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That is
they call the Kirby BG. It's like, hey man, I'm not doing this no more, man.
Right.
No, I know he's heard about it too. I know he's heard about it, because it usually doesn't happen that way. So
and it's not like the network. It's not like we're not going to see this. Like you said, this is a nationally televised game for your presumptive number 1 starting out the season, Georgia. And this is a Masters tournament that has Tiger Woods saying, yes, I plan to play. So you're absolutely right. While you might have a contingent of dogs, fans that are headed down to Augusta to root them on, ultimately speaking, you're asking us to turn away from football.
Yeah, that's not cool. Don't do that. Don't make me choose. I know it's an easy choice for you guys. It's an easy choice for a lot of people out there. There's some overlap, but it's like, that's the Masters. That's the tournament. That's the one. Saturday's moving day. We got all this stuff. Now, I will say, I believe G-Day starts at 1 o'clock. So at least we have that, where the leaders of the golf tournament won't be teeing off until roughly 2:30 on Saturday. So you can switch over and still watch 3 or 4 hours of golf. Like, we'll make it work. You know, this is first world problems type of thing, but I'll get through it. I'll see my therapist next week about it, but I'll get through it.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Some things put you back on the couch. You don't want them to, but they just do.
And to be honest with you, like, look at, and to add to that, because, Tiger Woods brought a lot of people. He brought myself, and into having some interest into the game, and for him to kind of be making an announcement that he's abstaining, from doing certain things.
Yeah. Like the struggle.
So that means it's very serious to him. So like, hey, I want to see what abstaining means.
Amateur golfers should not take this advice. This is for Tiger, okay?
Right, exactly.
Tiger can only do stuff like this.
The six dogs, we don't know that this is going to pay dividends for you. So we're not, prescribing this as your method to getting your green jacket. That is that's a full disclaimer, like the ones that we have to use on the Atlanta Football Party. That is our disclaimer for this particular show. Now, I don't know if I want to call it a more serious note, but on one of those notes of like, we know that the basketball transfer portal window opened last week. So we kind of expected to see this kind of movement potentially, but I do think at least 2 out of the 3 names for sure, the movement was kind of disappointing. Of course, we heard that Jabri Abdur-Rahim was entering the transfer portal. We got that word just today, but he's also going to be declaring for the NBA draft. So obviously just trying to get a feeler for where he might be able to land, if he's going to land a place in the draft, or if not, maybe kind of moving on elsewhere. But also yesterday, Justin Hill and Matthew Alexander Moncrief entered the portal. So Jarvis, it kind of made me think bigger picture about whether or not you're concerned for this Dawgs basketball team with these 3 potential departures, or are they going to be okay, meaning that program, because A, who they might snag in the portal, B, this is just kind of the way it goes, and Mike White and company were prepared for it, and C, they did snag a 5-star in Asa Newell.
Well, that's the only one they have according to ESPN. So we got a little bit more work to do. So yeah, Mike. I don't know. You might should have
called somebody in Lexington because they got
because you need to hit the road, Jack.
Well, hey, there's that other SEC school that lost a coach, so they're probably, and I know one of their players obviously is going to follow Calipari, but there may be some opportunity there for him to snag somebody.
You better doggone start making phone calls to Arkansas, because look,
that too.
Probably won't say it, but he bringing his Louis bags back to Arkansas for sure. Like, it's some guys already don't jump in the portal from Kentucky. So when you think about from that standpoint, all this movement, you better take advantage. And I think that Mike White, he has you've seen that it was a little bit better than it was obviously last year, but now going into your 3rd year as the head coach, you got to start seeing some results, because no longer are the days of, oh yeah, we'll do our thing in football and basketball, we'll just kind of do whatever. Nah, not now. Nate Oates down there is changing of the guard. He turned down the Kentucky gig. Like, who would have thought that 10 years ago? The Alabama head coach has turned down an opportunity to go to make all types of money at Kentucky. Yes. Like, come on now, this is what we're dealing with. So the bar has been raised in the SEC as far as basketball goes. So yeah, Mike White better start picking up that phone or hopping on that private jet and ask Kirby, can he use that helicopter or something? Because, it's time. Your time about to be up, Jack. Like, those expectations have been raised, sir.
Right, and be prepared to have whatever conversations you need to have with boosters and the like, so that you can get that NIL money up. Because I know that's a big deal. Like, I know that's probably what these guys are looking for, because now they get to say, hey, we went to the Final Four of the NIT. It's still something. It may not be the Final Four of March Madness, but it is still something that makes them a little bit more marketable. So I think that's big. And another thing that you mentioned, Jarvis, is this, as we wrap up, when you look across the SEC, and no, we don't necessarily agree with Greg Sankey's comments, because it turned out that they weren't maybe as strong as we thought they were and able to go as deep into the tournament. But real talk, there were 7 teams from the SEC that made the NCAA tournament, and then another that made the NIT and almost got to that championship game. So I think that speaks volumes to what you just said, Jarvis, that this is not your old SEC basketball anymore. This is real. This is a real, like, second level sport where you got to get your game up, because it's starting to be a thing. And one more thing, I'm sorry, no, I said we're going to wrap up, but I just got to mention this just real quick. Stephon Castle was doing the darn thing with UConn, right? And I know I'm going to, Sinai Fagan and Raven Johnson, 3 players who got to championship games and won it all and actually were critical in the wins for their teams, men's and women's titles respectively, right in your backyard. You got to start making it your business to get those kids to stay home, because you need to start hanging some banners, just like they're hanging banners up in stores and they're hanging banners up in, you know what I mean? Like, you need to start really thinking about that. The fact that these players could be right there in your backyard. And in the meantime, they're going to contribute to other programs, winning multiple championships, when in actuality, they could be here helping you to build your own. Listen, we appreciate you guys stopping by the Atlanta Football Party and for letting us talk a little golf and for letting us talk a little bit of basketball as well. Because after all, it's the home for the best Georgia Bulldogs talk, football, and all else included. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And also, we're free and available wherever you download your podcast. Make sure you check us out on Thursday at the Atlanta Sports Party. We'll see you.